when he was creating man. And we'll see, hopefully get to that today. But it's really, if you haven't got a chance, I don't know what the song was called off the top of my head. I don't even know who sings it. I think it's Crowder. But it's a really good song, and it's just really, really interesting, kind of the ways in that he, I guess, describes some of the things that he's talking about as he's going through it. But it just reminded me, and kind of made me think of what we've been going over here through the first couple of lessons. I was working a second ago, Lando. I don't know what happened to it. There it goes. All right, so the days of forming is the first that we did. Of course, days 1 through 3 are the days of forming. We won't go back in and read those. We're going to go, you can look down to chapter or verse 14. I don't know how your Bible sets it up. It's on my front page, but that's where we're going to start today, is verse 14. But created the light of the day, the dark of the night, of course, we know. Then he separated the waters, separated the water in the air and the water in the on the land, or on the bottom below the air, the oceans and stuff. As we kind of know, he didn't separate them off just yet. There was essentially just a huge body. And I'm not going to go back through all of this because I recapped all of it. It'll take me quite a while. Day 3, of course, was vegetation. He started, and we talked about this last week, that he essentially didn't just say grass here, plants here, whatever. It says specifically that he started the processes of being able to produce fruit, produce the seed. That way they could, propagate and continue to reproduce. God didn't just say grass, go, right? He actually created the entire process. We talked about that process last week, how plants pollinate and all that good stuff that happens. God created all of that as he was just essentially speaking it into existence. Okay, now, interesting fact that on day 3, God created these plants, and we know that at the very source, plants have to have what to survive? Sunlight, right, from the sun. And then we noticed that we got to day 4. Here are some of the plants that we looked at last week. And as we got to day 4, the days of filling, we know that he set the sun and the moon and called them by name. So God essentially, the things that needed sunlight didn't even have sunlight to start with. And this is what we finished up with last week, because I wanted to kind of remind you of that as well. Really interesting and really neat that God allowed these plants essentially to have life and have no sun. Because we said that life comes from God, right? Evolutionary scientists, pretty much any biology book that you pick up, say that the reason that we have life on Earth is because of the sun. The sun propagates all those things. It allows this closed system to happen. The energy coming in is used by the plants and things that we have, and then it gets passed down through all the ecosystems and stuff, which is true, but it doesn't start life, right? God started that. And that's where we finished up with last week, and that was the 4th day. And we will read verses 14 down through verse 18, because we didn't get to talk about everything I wanted to talk about. These are 2 great lights that he talked about and that he put in there. So go to verse 14 first, Genesis chapter 1. And God said, let the lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and then let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And he set them in the firmament above the heaven and gave light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw it was good, and the evening and the morning were the 4th day. Okay, so these are the days of filling. God has formed the earth first 3 days. Now he's going to fulfill it in the ways in which, not that we see exactly today, but the stuff that we see today, God was creating on these days as well. And we see here the sun and the moon are in the other stars, the innumerable hosts that are in the universe that we can see. I know here in the mountains, especially on a good clear spring night, you can look up and you can just stars as far as the eye can see, right? God created all those things and put them into place. 2 weeks ago, one of the telescopes, that we had put into space had the ability to take a picture of a black hole, which a black hole was just part of things that are one of the things that are in the universe. It's just there, kind of like stars and anything else. It was billions and billions and billions of miles away from the Earth. But they were able to take a picture of it, which is the first time that's ever happened. But again, this was really, this was light years and light years and light years away from the earth. God put it there, right? It's just really cool. God put it there. Last year around this time, they found a couple of planets that were out there they thought might be habitable, had some places that may be habitable for life. Of course, we'll never be able to get there to see, but just from their observations that were there were green things there, maybe potentially some water and some frozen ways. God put it there, right? And it's just really cool that all those things, he did that, and this is when he's doing it, and putting all those things into motion and putting all those things in place as well. So that's what he's doing here, day 4, distinguishing the light and the day, of course, the sun and the moon as we know it. The greater one, of course, the sun rules the day. The lesser one, of course, the moon rules the night. And illuminated the heavens and did all the stuff that he did. Now, beyond providing light for the earth here with the sun on a continuous basis, which is what this is, he also here, by putting these two lights in the sky, instead of just providing the light, also separates the day from night here, right? Separates the light from the darkness. It also helps us distinguish days, one from another. Now, one thing we can count on in the morning, the sun coming up, right? We know that as long as we get through the night, the sun's going to come up in the morning, and then it's going to go through, and the sun, we can physically watch the sun move, okay, right, throughout the day. Now, is the sun moving? No, we are, but in our perspective, we can see the sun go down, see the moon come up, and then that, of course, is the rotation of us on the earth as we rotate around our axis. That's what allows us to have day and night. Okay, so these also would be instruments, as we saw in verses 14 and 15 there. Not only is it to help us distinguish from day and night, it also helps us distinguish from seasons, right? And those seasons then help us mark the time in years. So God's setting up not just day and night, but he's also setting up the years, also setting up the seasons that we have. And over in Psalms, I think it may be that one of the promises that he gives us is that there will always be seasons, right? There's always going to be a changing of time, always going to be a changing of seasons. And that's how we as humans then mark the years, right? We know that about this time every year, stuff's going to start budding. It's going to start getting warmer. We're going to start having rain showers, kind of like we've had. And think grass is going to be greener. We're going to start mowing and doing all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to have summer, and then the fall is going to quit, and it's going to be colder in the winter. So all this was started here day 4, okay? It's the whole process. When he stuck the sun and the moon there, he didn't just give us light. He gave us all the kind of the processes that we have here on earth as well, okay? Which is important for us kind of to see that. And then as an emphasis on the greatness or the magnitude of the creative power here of God, Moses records simply here in verse 16. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, okay, which is a pretty impressive fact. Then Moses just throws in there what at the end of verse 16? Oh, by the way, what? What does it say? Oh, yeah, and he made the stars also. Okay, he made the stars also. Just to show the magnitude of the infinite creative power of God. Yeah, he set the sun and moon there, and then he said, we need stars. Okay, and that's kind of how it works. It's kind of an offhand statement there that Moses put in there, but it just shows the magnitude by which what God was doing here when he was creating, the emphasis that he had on it. Let's go over to Genesis 15, just because it's close. And look at verse 5. And he brought him forth abroad and said, Look now toward heaven, and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. Of course, we know here of Abraham the kind of stuff that's going on, but he wants him to look up into the stars and he wants him to count them, right? And has Abram here have the ability to count all the stars? No. Okay, he's telling him that's how many family members he's going to have. That's how his lineage is going to be. And again, showing the greatness of the majesty here of God. He did that with just, I don't know, he just spoke it. He just said it. Let there be stars. stars, and there were stars. And there were just all the stuff that we see, the Little Dipper and the Big Dipper and all of the Orion's belt and all of the star astrology signs that they used to use back in the day to navigate with. And he put them all there, and he did it for a reason. And you don't think God put the Little Dipper there for us just to enjoy, and the Big Dipper there just for us to enjoy, be able to see and kind of trace that out? That's exactly what he did, and that's why it's there. Okay? And if you started, this is just a fact that I found, and I thought this was interesting. You all may not, but if you started counting stars, okay, and you counted them at 3 every second, so every 3 seconds there's a star, every 3 seconds 2, so on and so forth, you would not even be able to get through all the stars in our galaxy, just in our galaxy, in 1,000 years. So if you did one star every 3 seconds, you couldn't count just the stars in the Milky Way in 1,000 years. There's infinite universes out there, right? And the number of galaxies is in the billions. Can I tell you how many stars he created? Go to Psalms 147 with me. So one every 3 seconds, we couldn't count all the stars in the Milky Way in 1,000 years. That doesn't count the billions of other galaxies that are out there. And in verse 4 and 5 of Psalms 147, it says this: he does what? Tells the what? The numbers of the stars. So not only is God able to number those stars, okay, which is impressive in its own right. We continue in verse 4, and it says what? What does he do with those stars? He's got a name for all of them. He's got a name for. He can look out there. I know that one. This one's this, so on and so forth. So he knows the number, which we can never be able to do. He then has them named and knows them by name. I have 45 kids that I'm dealing with this semester. It took me 9 weeks to remember their names. Okay, a lot of times. Well, I had one little girl that I called the wrong name last week and she corrected me. Sorry, it's on me. I apologize. But he knows them by name. Okay, all of the stars. Verse 5. Great is our Lord and of great power. What did it say about his understanding? His understanding is what? It's infinite. There's no end to it. We can't even fathom the understanding that he has. Guys, that person, that God, that divine being, that person who is in charge of putting all these things in place and was able to do it, he's numbered and named the stars. He created plants and animals and put the sun where it needed to be and put the moon where it needed to be. That God who has an infinite understanding wants to know us, has a desire to know us on an intimate, personal level. How can we not want to? How can we as Christians not want to have that same level of knowledge of God as well? Not to have that same desire to have that same type of relationship with Him as well. That man, that being, that divine force who sent His Son down here, who we're celebrating today, right? That He went to the cross for us, and He lived a perfect life for us, and He covered all of our sins, and He went and He conquered death, and He conquered the grave. He did all those things. That person wants to know us on an intimate level. He wants us. He desires our worship. He desires our daily conversation. It's amazing. And then we, a lot of times, are so brass and so arrogant that we just kind of put it off to the side and think, God, I really don't have time for that today. I don't have time for that today. I've got too much stuff going on. The baby's screaming. I got stuff to get done. Man, how petty can we be? The God of the universe wants to know us personally and wants us to know Him personally as well. Often those people who reject the idea of the 6 literal days of creation point to the creation of the sun here on the 4th day to help support their ideas that the first 3 days of creation could not have been measured in normal time, right? If the sun was there to give us day and night and give us this 24-hour period, then what about the first 3 days? If the Bible says that's what helped us separate those things, then the first 3 days could not have been a literal 24-hour days as well. Now, the light source, though, that God created on the first day, which we saw in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. I'm on verse 2 now. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. In verse 3 it says, and God said, let there be light. So there was a light source that God created before He created the sun. Okay, so that source of light that He created on the first 3 days functioned in a very similar manner to as the sun did. Shows that now from the beginning of God's revelation that the sun is neither the source of life, the sun's not the source as either as of evolution or as many other pagan systems have taught, nor will it be essential for life on the new earth in all of eternity. Okay, again, taking that evolutionary geology idea that we've been taught and that we have to teach and picking away at it, right? The sun is not the source for life. It wasn't at the beginning. It will not be at the end as well. And let's go look at it. Revelations chapter 21. We're at the beginning of the book. Let's go ahead and go to the end of it as well. And we'll notice that at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book, the sun is not in here anywhere. The sun is an S-U-N, okay, as a source. Verse 4 we know, but it was there was a point, there was before sun, okay? And there'll be a point after it as well. Revelation chapter 21, and let's look at verse 23. And the cities had no need of what? Of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it. Because what was lighting up here the city? The glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. Let's look at Revelation chapter 22 and verse 5. And there shall be what? No night there, and no need for candle, neither the light of the sun, for the Lord God giveth them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. The same Spirit of the Lord that came over the creation in the first 3 days that allowed light to be there is the exact same light from the Spirit that we're going to get when we're in heaven, because there's going to be no need for the sun and no need for the moon. All right? After Revelation, after the tribulation, after the rapture, after all the terrible stuff that happens in Revelation, because we as a bunch of idiots won't listen to what God has told us now for several thousands of years, it finally gets to a point God's got to make it new again. Because we don't get it. And we still don't get it, and we won't get it. God's got to make it new again, and the sun is no need for it there because the light emanates from His glory, which is the exact same thing that happened in the first 3 days. If you're going to tell me God can't create the sun and not light up the earth before the sun was there, then there's a problem there, right? He has the ability to do that. If the guy that can name the stars, he can make the light before 3 days before the sun is there. That's very simple for Him. It's very closed-minded and simple-minded for us to think that God was not able to do that. Again, that's just us removing God from the equation and putting our finite minds because we think that we know more stuff than what God knows, and that's just simply not the case. Now, just as God divided the water in the atmosphere from the water on the earth on the second day, on the fifth day now, which is where we're moving to, He filled both the sky and the seas with the very first moving creatures. Now we're on verse 20. And on to the fifth day. And God said, let the water bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of the heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the water brought forth abundantly, after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the fowl multiply in the earth. In the evening and morning were the fifth day. So on the fifth day here, He fills both the sky and the water, the seas, with the very first moving creatures. Now, these are the very first creatures, living, moving creatures around that are on the earth. Okay, He created the birds, as we see in verse 20, to fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And He also made the sea animals to live and fill the waters waters that were in the seas. Okay, so 3 days now, all right? 3 days after gathering the water to create dry land, God filled that land with, and starting to, or before, filled the dry land. Before that, he now has filled the water and the air with living creatures. Now, there is a multitude of studies and books and things that you can read about how the life of things kind of got started here, okay? As far as the things evolving and taking over time. Now, I told you that most scientists believe that at about 4.6 billion years ago, that is when the Earth was formed, and they say that 1.6 billion years ago, okay, was the very first life that was introduced on Earth, okay? And in that idea, that concept is that over those millions and billions of years, the Earth that was there, when it first got there, first crashed into the space that it's in, I guess, however you want to put it, that the conditions on it were not very good, right? It didn't have any oxygen, it was hot, and there was all kinds of stuff, bad stuff that was going on because it just kind of slammed into orbit out of Earth, or whatever the idea is. But they say that from that point, so it takes about 3 billion years to kind of get to where it's starting to be okay for life. And there's a little bit of water vapor, they say, that's there. Of course, the sun is here, and it's putting in the UV rays and doing all the different things that's happening. And it's called endosymbiotic theory of evolution. Everything kind of states back to that prokaryotes, which are single-celled organisms. Now, I'm not going to bore you to death, okay? Just want to kind of give you an idea of what's going on here, what was kind of being taught. The prokaryotes, which are single-celled organisms, first developed at 1.6 billion years ago. Now, there are a bunch of theories on how that happened, okay? I won't go through all of them. One of them is called the bubble theory, one's called the microsphere theory, and one of them called, you probably heard of, the primordial soup theory. That's the one that's kind of the most famous. And those are all just different ideas and different ways in which all the stuff needed for life kind of got together by chance, and it was hit by lightning and all these things, and they try to recreate all these things in the lab, and then they've not been able to do any of those, recreate any of them at all. But that's how they say life got started, okay? After about another billion years, we have endosymbiotic theory, which says that the prokaryotes started eating each other, makes eukaryotes, which are multicellular, and then evolution things just kind of kept happening and happening and happening and happening and happening. The problem with, and if you look down and read it, if they've made it make some sense. I mean, I can give you a pretty streamlined pathway of how they can describe it, and it would make a little bit of sense for somebody who had no concept of how life got here. The problem with all of it is that those phases between when one thing evolved into another thing, right? Those intermediate periods when this bird changed into this fish, or the fish changed into the bird, fish changing into the monkey, or go on, right? We kind of know how this is. They use the fossils of these animals to justify and describe and show how this happened. Charles Darwin first got to do this back in the 1800s, and he went on the Galapagos Islands and went on this excursions when he developed this idea of theory of evolution by means of natural selection. He would collect all these fossils, and they're really, really cool fossils, right? They're really awesome stuff. He was getting full, like, frogs and stuff that had been preserved. And he was pulling them out, and he was keeping them and collecting them. It would be really, really cool. And we all like fossils. We all like when dinosaur fossils get erected, right? We can see how the dinosaurs were. It's really, really neat to see all these really old organisms that were there. The problem with evolution is, though, that they like to take those fossils and use that as a history of how life evolved. And there's never a point, right? The famous one is that we as men came from apes. We've all heard that, yes? The problem with that is, though, there's never a point to where they're able to pull up bones or a fossil of an organism that was in between us and the monkeys, right? We've never seen that. It's called the missing link. Getting ready to do a children's movie about it in a little bit. But that's the problem with this. And so there is the idea of how we as man and how life got started. Guys, that takes I tell my kids this at school. And I let them come up with their own ideas because I'm a good liberal arts public high school teacher. And once they tell me their ideas, I'll tell them if they're right or wrong. And they may fire me for it. And I've said this before. If they're going to fire me for telling people about God, then I'll find me another job. That doesn't bother me a bit. I'll find something else to do. But I'll allow my kids to tell me, how do you think we got here? And most of them have a variety of ideas. Some of them have no idea of all and never really thought about it. And it blows my mind, and I tell them this too, that because they always come around and ask me, what do you think, Coach, or what are your ideas? And I'm always quick to tell them and I'll show them some Answers in Genesis YouTube videos in class, which probably isn't legal, but I do it anyways. But and the same thing I'll tell you, it's harder for me. Right? It's for me, and the way my brain works, and it's pretty analytical, and it sees things pretty much black and white most of the time. It's the way God made me. It's harder for me to think that me developed from this fish that went into a monkey that then eventually came into a man. It's harder for me to believe that to be true than to say that the creator of the universe, who started all of these processes, right, who can number the stars, who put the sun exactly, it's for me to believe that I just started by chance than it is for me to accept the fact that there is a divine being that took special care in making me just the way that I am. It takes a whole lot more faith for me to think that some monkey in Africa somewhere just eventually got to the point where it needed a certain amount of food, and the temperature got too hot, and the water got too high, or whatever it was, and the environmental pressures changed its body in some way. That's what natural selection says. Environmental pressures will cause these animals to change their bodies in some way to become more like man. That's harder for me to believe than to simply just say that, you know what, there's a God out there who knows more than I do, who's greater than I am, who made me just the way I am. That's right. And it's much more easy for me to have faith in the God that did those things. Okay? So that's the fifth day. God, this huge, there is, every year they find 200,000 or 300,000 brand new species in the ocean that they didn't know was there. God created all that stuff on day 5. Some people say that we know less about the ocean than we knew about space. God put those things there all on day 5. He created this explosion of species, and He did it just for His glory. Let's get to day 6 as well. We're not going to do man today, okay? We're going to do man next week. We're going to probably take all week next Sunday just talking about man. But before man, God created some other stuff as well. So let's go to verse 24, and we'll get to day 6. I don't think I have any pictures of... Yeah, there's a bird, a seagull, and I should have put Nemo. Here we go. Yeah, I thought I had some pictures. There's some cool looking birds. I don't know all these names, but there's some interesting things. That is one of the fish that's there. Now this one I don't remember its name, but if you open its mouth, you see how it has lips that look a lot like our lips, don't they? They really do. There's some similarities there. And if you open its mouth, it has almost like human looking teeth. That's what it uses to chomp. They're really flat. That's what it uses to chomp. Something that God made, right? I mean, it's ugly. Whew, it's ugly, right? But God finds the beauty in it somewhere, and put it there for people to see. I don't think I have any more. Yeah, that's it. So day 6 now, the famous day 6, that we see starting in verse 24. And God said, verse 24, let the earth bring forth living creatures after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so. Verse 25, and God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And we're going to start right there. We're not going to get to verse 26 yet. So now after 3 days, after he has collected the earth and put it together and separated it off from the oceans, the earth again, at one point, the 7 continents that we have, I just want you to remember this. I'm going to allude to this fact a lot because when we start talking about the flood in a couple of weeks, it's going to be important to us. The continents that we know them today were all together. Okay, and if you take them, you can put them together like puzzle pieces. And the scientists call that landmass Pangea. Makes sense. That's what we're going to call it as well, because there's just a good name for it. But all of the continents that we know that were spread out were all together in one place. Okay, and in this huge continent of land, God brings forth all of the animals that we have and that we know of today. And He didn't just like He did with the fish and the birds. He didn't just put them there and say go. He gave them the means by which they could reproduce and continue to be fruitful and multiply. God started all that. There are thousands and thousands of studies done on the behavioral and reproductive ideas of animals. Each of them do something different. Right now it's turkey season, and sometimes, and we saw one the other day, we saw this turkey blowed up big, right, with its tail feathers out, strutting around in front of some hens because he's trying to get the hens so that they can reproduce. That's something God put in them innately. Okay, during the fall, we know that the deer start to make little scrapes, and then they pee in the scrapes, and they try to find each other and do all the stuff that they do. That's another way in which they reproduce. That's how they do that. It is the behavior that God gave them. So He didn't just simply say, there's a deer. He gave it all of the instincts available to it so that it could reproduce as well. And we could go on and on about that. Right? Birds singing different songs. Now, this includes all of the animals designed to live primarily on the land. Like the sea creatures, the animals able to reproduce. Now, we can be certain that on day 6 here, that the dinosaurs were among the various types of beasts that God created on the earth on the 6th day. The scriptures even go as far to make this point clear in recording how God challenged Job to consider this awesome spectacle of behemoth. All right, so let's go to Job chapter 40. And we're mentioning dinosaurs for a very specific reason here. And I think God puts this behemoth in here for a very specific reason. And this is going to be a Lanceism this morning. I'm going to tell you why I think this is here. Job 40, and I'm going to start in verse 15. Now, God is talking to Job here, and He tells him, behold now behemoth, okay, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox. Now, from our knowledge and just from everybody loves dinosaurs, right? Everybody loves dinosaurs. We do. They're cool, okay? So we see here that in this case, this is a behemoth, which is more than likely one of the dinosaurs that was eating grass just like the cows were eating, like the ox was, okay? And Job sees this, all right? This would have been created on day 6 with the other creatures. Let's go to verse 16. Lo, now his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar of sinews, of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong as a piece of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of God. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. Surely the mountains bring him forth food, and where all the beasts of the field play. Let's keep going. He lieth under the shady trees and the covert of the reeds and the fens. The shady trees cover him with their shadow. The willows of the brook compass him about. Behold, he drinketh up a river and hasteth not. He trusteth that he can draw up Jordan into his mouth. He taketh it with his eyes. His nose pierces through snares. There is a description of what we can see as of a dinosaur. That's essentially what that is. Okay, and there's a specific reason I think that God puts this here. Okay, I want to finish with this. Let's go back over to Genesis. Now, on day 6, He creates these animals. The dogs, the cats, the lions, the tigers, we can go on and on and on and on. He also creates the dinosaurs. Now, God puts in Job, as we see here also, the dinosaurs, and he's challenging Job to see the awesome spectacle. If we go over to Psalms, and we don't have time today, but I'm going to give you the references, 74:13 and 14, Psalms 104:26, and even in Isaiah 27, he talks about another description of a large beast called Leviathan. Okay, so we see two instances now, Behemoth and Leviathan. That gives a description. Now, it's unclear if Leviathan was created on either day 5 or day 6. Some people think it may have been a sea monster. But one thing is for sure certain, God did create these things, okay? Now, the reason that we see this, and the reason that I want to show you this, what is the great debate when we're talking about ways of evolution? What is one of the things that they use, one of the things that scientists use to talk about evolution, one of the things they always mention is what? The dinosaurs, right? They're always talking about the extinction of the dinosaurs 250 million years ago. That was a way they prove and show evolution. Now, we can see that God specifically puts two instances in scriptures talking about the dinosaurs that he created. Because he knew that in 4,000 or 5,000 years, some men were going to be talking about dinosaurs that died 250 million years ago to help prove their ideas on evolution. But yet we see in instances now God saying, no. The behemoth, the Leviathan, it was here. I created it. And men saw it. Right? Job walks out and sees probably this huge Bronchiosaurus, which is the big long neck ones. Okay? And Isaiah talks about Leviathan, who probably was very similar to what we see as the Loch Ness Monster. Okay? So these, not only were they alive when men were, or not only did God create them, but they were alive when man was alive. Right? Man saw these creatures. Noah brought some dinosaurs on the ark. Probably babies, but nonetheless, Noah brought some dinosaurs on the ark. Okay? So again, another idea, we're taking evolutionary geology, 250 million years ago, the dinosaurs were here and they died. No, God put them here because God has the ability to do that. On day 6, God creates the land animals as we see them. Next week, we're going to look at God creating man because we have lots of stuff to look at. If you have a chance this week and you got a pen, I want you to write down this word. I want you to look it up. Lamikin. L-A-M-I-K-I-N. L-A-M-I-K-I-N. Lamikin. It's a protein that is in your body. Okay? And we're going to talk about it next week because it's a really cool protein and it's shaped just like a cross. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the lesson we had today. Thank you for the fact that you were able to do all these things and say them and how we can see them and be able to study them and talk about them, Lord. And we thank you so much for the beauty of creation that you gave us and how, Lord, you put it here for us to enjoy, but also for us to understand the majesty of who you are. And I pray it's my desire that we sit in here today and never forget that. Never lose sight of the fact that you are worthy of our honor, you're worthy of our praise, worthy of our worship. And I pray as Pastor Rob comes in the next hour as well, that you'll just use his message this morning that he has for us in a mighty way. And keep us attentive to the word that you've given. I pray. Amen.